Bonjour, this is Madame J, and this is a grammar lesson for French for Honors. So today in class we looked at some examples of sentences using relative pronouns, and you came up with the rules on your own. Some of that might have been review. What we're going to do in this video lesson is just sort of refine this a little bit more, and for those of you who appreciate this sort of technical grammatical explanation, here it is. You can also find this in Lesson 6 of Imaginer, and I believe it's page 216 or close to there. So I'm going to go back to what I have in front of me on my screen is une fête familiale dont je me souviens bien, c'est quand? And that was one of the sentence frames I gave you today to work with in conversation. What I want to do is just one example before I launch into the explanation so that you can kind of have something to come back to anchor you. So the idea of relative pronouns is that you're trying to avoid repetition and you're trying to create longer, more complete, sophisticated sentence structures. So if I sort of took the same idea of what I had in front of me on the screen and put it into more of a prompt or a question, it could look something like these two sentences. So first, parlez-moi d'une fête familiale, and then vous vous souvenez bien de cette fête? And so what I have here is two kind of piecemeal sentences because they're not really getting at a complete idea. What I really want to ask you for, clearly in this, is that you're going to tell me about a family party that you remember well. And right now these two ideas are separated and I can only express them with the two separate sentences. So in order to put them together, and this is the thing I want you to keep in mind, no matter how complicated it seems, always come back to what is the thing that's repeated and then how do I replace that? So in this case, we're talking about a fête familiale and cette fête in the second one. So that's what I want to replace. And in this case, because I'm using de, okay, that's my cue for which relative pronoun. So instead of stating those two things separately, I might say, parlez-moi d'une fête familiale. So I'm keeping almost the entire, I'm keeping the entire first sentence. But then instead of adding that second question to clarify what I want, I can tag this on as a relative clause. Dont vous vous souvenez bien. Okay, so tell me about a family party that you remember well. Okay, so that's the idea of relative pronouns. I am going to go into sort of a note sheet format. You can access this as a PDF in the shared Google Drive for the class. And I'm just going to use this as a structure. So, qui, que, and dont in English kind of translate to the word that. So, c'est le livre que j'ai lu, it's the book that I read. C'est l'ordinateur qui ne marche pas, it's the computer that doesn't work. C'est l'ingrédient dont j'ai besoin. Okay. So, que, qui, and dont all kind of translate to that. They're used differently. And then ce que, ce qui, and ce dont all sort of translate to the relative pronoun what. So, le livre, c'est ce que j'ai lu. The book, it's what I read. L'ordinateur, c'est ce qui ne marche pas. The computer, it's what doesn't work. Que or ce que are always going to be followed by a subject and then a verb. So, if you look back up, c'est le livre que j'ai lu. I have a subject and a verb. Qui or ce qui are going to be followed by a verb itself. So, because qui is kind of standing in almost like a subject, c'est l'ordinateur qui ne marche pas. And then dont and ce dont are the hardest ones for English speakers to pick up on because you have to remember which expressions take de. So, things like parler de, avoir besoin de, the one I used in the example, se souvenir de. Okay, so in French we have some of these verbs that always take de after them. Those are the ones that are going to be your signal for dont or ce dont. Okay, and I put a note here that otherwise, like other than the de part, the dont and ce dont are just like que or ce que in every other way. It's just that dont and ce dont are special for taking the place of phrase objects that come after de. And a really easy one, a really easy relative pronoun is où because it takes the place of a place or a time. So, c'est le moment où j'ai lu ce livre. C'est la librairie où j'ai acheté ce livre. So we could kind of use that as both where and when in that case, even though we know it means where. And then lequel, laquelle, and lesquels are very messy and hard to deal with. So I would recommend, if you're getting into a situation where you're using these, I want you to check the level of complexity of your sentence, because there's such a thing as a sentence that's a little too complex. But these do take the place of the object of a preposition. Okay. They have to agree in gender number. That's why you have 4 forms. And they have a bunch of extra rules, and that's what I mean about them being kind of complicated. So first of all, if you're replacing a human being in your sentences, you don't even use these, you use qui. And then if the preposition is a or de, you have special rules, because you know that just like a and le combine to be o, same thing with lequel. So a plus lequel gives you auquel. A laquelle is no problem. And then you have auquel plural. Same thing with de. So duquel, de laquelle, desquels, desquels. Duquel, you should always, always, always second guess yourself if you're using duquel, because it's quite likely that you should have been using dont instead. Duquel, I almost never use it myself, so it just it takes the it works where you have a prepositional phrase that has de. So remember that dont was for things that just have de. If you have a prepositional phrase like près de or loin de, à gauche de, à droite de, that's when you're going to be using duquel and the rest of those. Okay, so just to sum up and kind of give some reminders, relative pronouns relate one phrase in the sentence to the other. So that's why we have them, to kind of link things together. Like other pronouns, they help avoid repetition, and they also help to avoid repetition. In English, relative pronouns are frequently dropped. So in English, we'll say something like, it's the store I went to. In French, we can't do that. You have to say, c'est le magasin où je suis allé. I have to use some kind of relative pronoun in there. And like I said, the idea of this really is that you're giving more information, asking for more detail with one sentence. And so you're connecting things to make it a little bit more sophisticated. Okay, au revoir.